The speculations in this book about the nature of human beings, their natural environment, religion, and myth are very interesting, of course, and although I can also say they're highly reductive. Nonetheless, its cultural impact is undeniable, and many of its theories are not only interesting, but today people speak of them as if they're the most normal thing to believe. So I'll go into some of its points, discuss some of the aspects that I think may be problematic, and as I always do, give you a spoiler-free overview. So stay tuned. Welcome to biblioCultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and check out my link on the bottom on X if you want to check out what I do there. And on the side, I put my Ko-Fi account where you can check out my merch store and you can also donate to the program. And I really appreciate whenever you do any of these things. And for those that already do, I really appreciate it. Again, the most important thing is to share these videos, because the more it gets out there, the more the algorithm will spread it around. I am aware that I am eclectic in the way I present books, in the sense that I don't usually go for mainstream books or books that are out there on the top selling list. I actually do this as I flow through information and through work, so the topics will be fluctuating in time and space as well. Some old books, some new books. It's basically wherever the flow takes me. And I know that for some, this is actually interesting and it's kind of like a shuffle of books. For some other people, they're used to channels that basically feed them what's out there, the new stuff, the top sellers, that kind of thing. And I know if I did this, I would get a lot more views. But the truth of the matter is that I am doing this because I love books and I love actually engaging in works that most people will never review. But that's kind of the point of this channel. But those that appreciate what I do and follow me here, I appreciate your support. Now, of course, I do like classics and I do review these types of books. This is a good example right here. In this episode, I'm going over The Dragons of Eden by Carl Sagan. And this is from Ballantine Books. And for some reason, I cannot find the exact date of publishing. It tells me 1978. It doesn't look like a 1978 paperback. I don't know why some of these prints, they just don't give you the print date for some reason. So I assume it's fairly recent or early 2000s. You should be able to find a lot of different editions of this. And I don't mind reading small paperbacks. As a matter of fact, many of the first books I ever read as a kid were paperbacks. So I don't mind them, although obviously I have a preference for the traditional hardcover format. But again, content is king, so whatever works for you to find the content is what really matters at the end of it all. Now, obviously, this book is predicated on the tacit acceptance of Darwinian natural selection. So without this presupposition, the book is ironic and incoherent. But if you at least accept as a basic underlying reality, then it allows you to understand his worldview. And then the book can be enjoyable. I find that if I enter a book already with a sense that the premise is absurd and nonsense or whatever, then it's very difficult to even engage the book in a neutral fashion or even in an enjoyable fashion, because I'm already arguing with the book from the beginning. So though it was very tempting for me to do this in this book, I resisted, and I'm glad I did, because as I went through the book, I was able to derive a lot of benefit from it. Of course, like all good mainstream evolutionists who are willing to discuss all sorts of interesting data to make the case for differences and category distinctions between species and subspecies, and how some creatures evolved from others, or how they developed due to competition and intelligence differences and all that. And all this is wonderful until they hit human beings, at which point they suddenly remove their scientific hat and their sociological and political imperatives kick in, and suddenly they become Enlightenment philosophers, and utopians, and ontological egalitarians. And then all these distinctions and all these Darwinian evolutionary effects and weights and species and subspecies and sub-subspecies, all that goes away, and all human races are the same. Genders show no differences, really. They're all superficial physical characteristics, when right in their premise is the idea that physical characteristics are indicative of an actual internal reality, of a nature. So they literally go against their foundational axioms for the sake of political correctness, for the sake of being socially accepted. There's a dogma, there's a social conception that must be maintained as a religion. Egalitarianism, democracy, notions of fairness, human rights, all these elements that are clearly superimposed on reality from a philosophical point of view and shouldn't be considered and shouldn't be even discussed. So that's the kind of thing I dislike about Dawkins as well, that he would make an entire book on different species and how evolution worked this way, from this came this, and then when it came to human beings, suddenly evolution stopped. There's no development, there's no distinctions, there's no differences, everything is the same. Hold hands and sing in the campfire, because they're not willing to accept the consequences and the political repercussion of Darwinism. And I'm the type of person that I can respect that if that's your philosophical point of view, but then be consistent. Don't be a partial Darwinist, a convenient Darwinist. Either go full-blown Darwinist or don't. If you want to be a Rousseauian philosopher, then stick to it and then apply it throughout. It's usually right at this point. Once they hit things that are politically relevant to us, that's when they switch. Because they have no issue saying that the different hominids of the past were different, and how they competed with each other, and how Neanderthal was maybe not as intelligent as Cro-Magnon, and they have no issue playing these games. But once they get to real populations in the real world, they get shy, and suddenly there's this metaphysical category of sameness and equality. So I think it's dishonest and ridiculous, and I think it merits pointing it out. Now, his discussion on the brain was my favorite, though, because since he details how language is related to certain areas of the brain, it can explain why languages vary and how some are even better at explaining nuances than others, then this to me is a lot more interesting for the sake of philosophy and theology. It's an area that I've studied a lot when it comes to biblical languages, for example. This whole tension between the Greek and the ancient Hebrew, for example, to me is a very impactful difference, and it has to do a lot with how certain languages are limited in communicating certain abstract concepts, and how a simple change in language can change the whole dynamic of a religion. And by the way, this happens also between the Greek and the Latin, actually. So even that has an impact. Another topic that I enjoyed in the book is the topic of human-animal communication. Now, I remember reading Congo when I was a kid, and I was impacted by this notion that you could teach a gorilla or a chimp to do sign language. And this book goes into that phenomena and how they were able to teach these apes to communicate in a very efficient way. They would communicate emotions and nuances and conceptions even. The author also brings the sonar communication method of dolphins and whales, and how they capture images that they communicate through sound, so that you're almost getting a picture image of what the other animals saw. Very fascinating. The study of language itself has always been very important to understand human beings, but also to understand our universe. Of course, the theological implications are not addressed because of the Darwinian style in the book. So, do animals have souls? What is consciousness really? Is the soul something capable of reason and communication? Is that the key? Is that what makes it a soul? And if that's the case, can't we say that the chimp or the gorilla doesn't have a soul, because even though he's reasoning and communicating, it's not doing it the way that we think it should be done? And of course, that creates the effect of the person who's born blind and mute and deaf Are they humans? Do they have a soul? Etc. So ethical questions that kind of race up from there. He hovers over them. He kind of goes around them. But he does address them in a way that is fascinating and engaging, for sure. Of course, a lot of the science in this book is kind of old, and we know a lot more at this point. But it doesn't change the value of the content. And let me quote a few things here so you can get a flavor for the book. Humans exhibit an interesting separation of musical and verbal skills. Patients with lesions of the right temporal lobe or right hemispherectomies are significantly impaired in musical but not in verbal ability, in particular in the recognition and recall of melodies. But their ability to read music is unimpaired. This seems perfectly consistent with the separation of functions described. The memorization and appreciation of music involves the recognition of auditory patterns in a holistic rather than analytic temperament. That to me is obviously fascinating because music is a form of communication, and actually the written language of music is a fascinating topic. And when I was a kid and I took music, I always found it to be an amazing thing that you could speak without speaking. You could write without letters, and writing music to me was very powerful as a concept. The notion of symbols representing something other than verbal cues, but actually communicating melody, for example, or rhythm. But in this case, there's the issue of the brain itself, how certain areas of the brain can receive some information that others don't. So you can communicate to certain people with music in a better way than you could with concepts or with words. Now, here's another quote. The entire evolutionary record on our planet, particularly the record contained in fossil endocasts, illustrates a progressive tendency towards intelligence. There's nothing mysterious about this. Smart organisms, by and large, survive better and leave more offspring than stupid ones. The details will certainly depend on circumstances, as for example, if non-human primates with language have been exterminated by humans, he actually cancels his own premise. The notion of progressive evolution from a Darwinian point of view is ridiculous, because there is the notion of random mutation, but he's talking about a directed progressive evolutionary concept, which is neo-Darwinian. The very concept of a telos, of a purpose in evolution, defeats the entire premise of evolution. And of course, he nonetheless places in his own paragraph the reason why it is absurd. Because in many cases, the best populations will be exterminated by nature, by act of history, by many factors that have nothing to do with their quality or their intelligence. Disease being a great example of this. So if we have a bunch of apes that communicate with sign language and teach it to each other, and if some jerk comes along and decides to kill them all to make them into a barbecue, it's over. And there's no progressive evolution to speak of. And if you apply this to the entire theory, it collapses completely. So these are the types of ironic positions that happen because most of the people that assume these ideas don't realize that that's what they are, ideas. They're metaphysical, they're philosophical. And if you knock out a certain premise, you knock out the entire system. And you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have this notion of creation, progression, a form of teleological eschatology, and then suddenly say, you know what, but at the end of the day it's random, and it's meaningless, and everything happens organically from chaos, etc. I mean, it just becomes an absurd circular situation for them. So I would rather have someone that is consistent with their position again, instead of just bouncing all over the place with these different axiomatic assumptions, and people that read them usually don't realize that that's what they're doing, and they go around the world giving lectures of the most ridiculous stuff that has ever been conceived by man. That, by the way, change every month, every year, every decade. So the constant irony of the book is the arbitrary switch between creationism, order of existence, and Darwinism, which allows Sagan to pick and choose his logic as he goes through the book. Now, the reason I don't put this book as a reject is because it is a very good book. It's an interesting book, it's an engaging book, and it's a historically important book because of these points. So I will not put it in the reject shelf just because I disagree with a lot of the premises or something like this. I put books in that list when they are legitimately terrible from my point of view, somewhat worthless. This book is not that at all. I like the book and I recommend the book, but just be aware of the irony. There's something entertaining in the absurdity of it all. Now, I know I'm going to get some hate from Darwinists and evolutionists, and again, you may be misunderstanding my point. I think that if you're going to go that route, you should be consistent in that route. My critique here is the arbitrary nature of living as if you're not really a philosopher. So, again, enjoyable book, important book, but be aware that a lot of these ironies are embedded within the work, and it's not the only one. Many books of this nature that are out there are very similar, but they can be very entertaining, and this one is a great example of it. So, hopefully you enjoy this short review. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.